say Black Lives Matter. Well, maybe they do. But don't white lives matter as well? And this white life has been blighted by that favouritism that's followed that damn campaign. I expected Colonel Othello to make me his lieutenant. I know my value. I'm equal to the task. That promotion should have been mine by rights. It was my due. I worked for it. I deserved it. I expected it. But Othello, already elevated well beyond his own worth and station, elevates yet another of his very same hue. Is that a coincidence? I think not. He's pandered to the very same agenda that gave him his own undeserved promotion. And in conclusion, says he, I have already found my officer. And who is he? An unfledged rookie, Cassius, who's never commanded a squadron in the field, nor knows how to lead or inspire. He's full of theory without practice in all of his soldiership. Bah, there's no remedy. Preferment now goes by colour and ethnicity, sometimes even by gender, and not, as of old, by merit or experience, or where the second in command stood heir to the first. No wonder things are falling apart. You'll soon see what happens when those who rise to the top are far from the best for the task. We're all meant to look favourably on the likes of Othello and Cassius, but in our private thoughts, we still doubt their worth. Especially when they're elevated to high office or some other prominence. We think to ourselves, did they really get there by merit, or merely to satisfy some quota, some political agenda, some desire in those who promote them to be seen to be without prejudice themselves? When, in this climate, someone like Iago achieves standing in any field of endeavour, I know he must be worthy indeed. So, judge for yourselves whether Othello deserves my loyalty. Oh, I'll serve him. I'll follow him. I'll serve my time beneath him. We can't all be masters, but nor can all masters truly be followed. You all know some dutiful, ass-kissing fool, working like a mule for nothing but scraps from his master's table for all the thanks he gets. Well, that's no longer my way. There are others who put themselves first, and whilst giving the impression of loyalty, just line their own pockets. Well, now that my fidelity and good service goes unrewarded, I will follow this latter course. Perhaps there's another way to take my revenge on Othello. For I've observed that he's secretly courting General Brabant's fair daughter, Desdemona. And think of this, referring again to our innermost thoughts. There are still some who view the likes of Othello with his raw physicality and his powerful visceral presence to be somehow closer to the beast. It was Brabant who promoted Othello, but would he be best pleased to hear that his sweet, delicate daughter was entwined with the brute? I don't think so. But the regiment is one thing, the family is quite another. So, I'll warn Brabant to look to his daughter. I'll tell him that an old black ram is topping his white ewe. that his fair daughter and the lascivious Othello are making the beast with two backs. Let's see what happens. Well, as I thought, Brabant was completely in the dark about what was going on between his daughter and Othello, and wasn't best pleased to hear of it. The next day, I delighted in telling Othello that somehow Brabant had uncovered the truth, and was very much aggrieved, fully intending to come to the barracks and take issue with him. I'd certainly set the cat amongst the pigeons. The irony is that Brabant brought them together in the first place. Othello would visit Brabant at home, and young Desdemona would overhear their conversations about past military campaigns. Othello would boast of his success in battles and sieges, of hairbreadth escapes and imminent death, and once of being taken by the enemy. Young Desdemona devoured these tales of daring do, and when he started talking about his difficult upbringing by way of contrast with his later success, Desdemona was moved, often to tears. In short, she was mightily impressed by Othello, and her adoration, and no doubt her delicate beauty, in turn drew Othello to her. When Brabant arrived at the barracks, all hell broke out. He accused Othello of being unworthy of his daughter, of seducing her, and of leading her astray. By my actions, I had hoped that Othello would suffer the lasting enmity of Brabant and the rest of his clan. Well, the outcome was different, but yet might still work in my favour. You see, Othello persuaded Brabant that his intentions were honourable and that they were in time to be married. Brabant wasn't exactly overjoyed by this prospect, but he was, for the moment, placated. There was still the matter of Desdemona's dissembling. She had skillfully kept their courtship secret from Brabant, who warned Othello that she'd deceived her own father and may yet in time deceive her own husband. That parting remark planted within me the seed of a plan for an even sweeter revenge. You see, Desdemona is Othello's one weakness, but he's devoted to her. Yet I sense deep down fears himself unworthy of her, being a good few years older and not of such fair countenance, nor of such elevated birth, being of humble origins himself. It reflected well on him to have made such a desirable catch. This young and proud beauty on his arm must bolster his ego. All the ingredients were there for a profound jealousy should another man lead her astray. For the green-eyed monster is nothing but a reflection of ego. If a woman leaves a man for another, he soon fears that other to be somehow a better man than himself, especially in the conjugal department, and that hurts. And a competitive man like Othello, an alpha male by any standards, would feel that more deeply than most. For Othello always wants to be top dog. He's a sporting man, plays hard, and won't countenance second best in any tournament or contest, even when just played for laughs. There are some who say the sin of jealousy is stronger in Othello's own kind. Where he's from, if a wife betrays her husband, she risks being stoned to her death. And there's no such punishment for the man who leads her astray. Or if a young girl rejects a proposal of marriage, she risks being disfigured so no other would desire her again. Or she at least risks dishonouring her family and being cast out onto the street. And the women folk are all covered up from head to toe, so only their husband can look at them. Now, are these symptoms of jealousy, of possessiveness, or just of control? Are their women chattels, possessions like any other? But the men often flaunt their gilded luxuries if they have them. Their Italian sports cars, their expensive Swiss watches, their gold and their diamonds. And yet they keep their women covered up. Well, whatever's behind it, Othello's countrymen do seem to react more violently to a woman's rejection. So, if I can engineer a reason for Othello to question Desdemona's love, well, all things considered, that would be a sweet revenge indeed. I now hate Othello, but he holds me in good stead, which will make him easy to manipulate if I tread carefully. And if I can implicate Cassius as well, that would be a two-pronged revenge. For Cassius is, after all, a handsome man and a good few years Othello's junior. And he has that smoothness of manner which might be suspected of leading women astray. Let me see now. How can it be done? There are many possibilities. Othello is of an open and free nature and thinks men honest if they seem to be. So, if I'm subtle, I can lead him tenderly by the nose. I could start by asking him in jest if he thinks Cassius a little too familiar with Desdemona. Yes. That's the first step. Yes, I think I have the beginnings of a plan. I'm going to enjoy this. Cassius and I were due to stand watch, but not until 10 o'clock last night. There was an hour to kill, so I suggested a quick half in the local, outside the barrack gates. There, a couple of old friends would join us and we'd drink a toast to the health of Colonel Othello. Cassius was reluctant at first. Well, he has no head for drink. I gently taunted him, called him a killjoy, an old maid, a goody two-shoes. He could always drink shandy, or a bitter lemon, or some other women's drink, or maybe something with a little umbrella and a cherry on a stick. At length he gave in. He's easily led. My friends were prepared, and once there, I created an excuse to depart. A well-timed text of feigned importance requiring my immediate attention. I left Cassius in their clutches. They only had to fasten one spiked drink on him, and he'd be as full of quarrel and offence as the General's Jack Russell. Then, according to my instructions, one of them insulted Othello in no uncertain terms. Cassius leapt to Othello's defence, the insult was repeated, and the argument turned into a scuffle. Well, cut a long story short, Cassius wasn't there when Othello came to inspect the watch, finding me all alone at the barrack gates. I muttered some feeble excuse on Cassius' behalf, but then, at length, he turned up, all dishevelled, drunk and waving his pistol. Needless to say, Othello wasn't impressed, and said he'd lost all sense of place and duty. He'd unlaced his reputation and gone down very severely in Othello's opinion. He wasn't getting much sense out of Cassius, so he asked me to explain. I said I would rather cut out this tongue than betray a friend and comrade in arms. Well, Othello applauded me for my loyalty to Cassius, but said it was misplaced at this time. And Cassius was demoted on the spot. He has a quick temper, does Colonel Othello. Cassius was very downbeat. Not so much for his demotion, but for the loss of the one thing which he valued above all else, his reputation. I told him reputation was seldom to be trusted, often achieved without merit and lost without reason. Besides, there were other ways he could regain Othello's trust and get his rank back as well. He couldn't see how. So I suggested he appeal to Desdemona. She has a kind heart. She'll listen. She'll understand and speak to Othello on his behalf. And we all know she has Othello wrapped around her little finger. Cassius could see the merit in my advice and was grateful to me for my wisdom and kindness. Well, I said it was the least I could do. And furthermore, I would let him know when Othello was away from her side so that he could speak to her alone. Am I a villain to give Cassius advice which will restore his good fortune? Well, the worst sins are often committed under the cloak of innocence. So, when Desdemona comes to plead on Cassius' behalf, I'll subtly poison Othello's thoughts by implying, in jest, that she's only standing up for Cassius because she's taken a fancy to him. And Othello knows many a true word is spoken in jest. This way, I'll sow the seeds of doubt in his mind, and in time, Desdemona's compassion will be the downfall of all three of them. I timed it carefully. Knowing Desdemona to be alone, although only for a while because Othello and I were on our way back to the quarters, I told Cassius this was the moment. He had just enough time to ask for Desdemona's help in reinstating his position when I messaged him, letting him know Othello was soon to arrive and he should make his escape by the back door. Sadly, my message came a moment too late. For Othello caught a brief glimpse of Cassius from behind as he hastily departed. "Was that Cassius just then?" asked Othello. "Well, I don't think so," I answered. "What would he be doing here? And if it was Cassius, why would he rush out in such an unseemly fashion?" "Why, indeed," said Othello, his suspicions aroused. When later Othello told me of Desdemona's entreaties on Cassius' behalf, I feigned surprise. And then, as an aside, I asked if Cassius knew of their courtship. He told me he did, and that Cassius was very often their go-between. My veiled reaction, all pursed lips and dark frown, were enough to provoke further questions. I gave the impression I had something of importance to say, but I kept silent, a deep struggle within me. He demanded to know my thoughts on the matter. At length, I said, Cassius seems a loyal and honest man, and if he seems to be that way, who am I to doubt it? Aren't all men mostly what they seem? He wasn't convinced. He could tell I held back. He had to drag it out of me. Or so he thought. I ruefully admitted some vague suspicions, but I said it was in my nature to be suspicious, to see the worst in any man, and he really mustn't pay any attention. No, it's better I keep my thoughts to myself. Besides, I would never speak ill of a man if to do so were to damage that thing which we value above wealth. By which, of course, I meant reputation. And in any case, I told Othello to beware of jealousy. There's nothing worse than loving a woman and at the same time doubting her. Othello said he couldn't possibly be jealous of Desdemona, and then he would never doubt her. Never in 1,000 years. Unless, of course, there was cast iron proof that she'd betrayed him. Then there would be no need of jealousy, because jealousy can only exist when there is love. And if she had betrayed him, there would be no more love. So, no more jealousy. So he said. I told him that his words had persuaded me that nothing I could say could ever provoke jealous feelings in him, and therefore I could be frank with him and reveal my thoughts. Although there's probably no substance to my suspicions. Probably none whatsoever. But it couldn't hurt to keep an eye on Desdemona, and if she becomes even more vehement in her support for Cassius, perhaps then to start to ask why, what lies behind it. Perhaps nothing. Sometimes we just have to take things at face value. Although, where women are concerned, nothing is ever quite as it seems. They can be great dissemblers. Look at the way she deceived her father. I mean, Brabant is nothing if not a man of the world. Not a man to be so easily deceived, I should think. And deceived by someone so young and seemingly innocent. Othello was downcast. I hoped it was nothing I'd said. No, no, he claimed. There was no reason for him to doubt Desdemona. No reason at all. None whatsoever. But he asked me to keep my eyes open and report anything significant, anything remotely suggestive. But I said I most certainly would. But perhaps, I added, there might be something to be said for not reinstating Cassius at this time. Then Othello could judge Desdemona's reaction and make of it what he will. It would probably mean nothing to her. I told him that would be my guess. Of course, seeing Cassius not reinstated, Desdemona raised the matter again and again with Othello, pleading his case with all her eloquence, serving only to increase his suspicions. So I played my game one step at a time, and the most vital ingredient was a certain strawberry-patterned face mask belonging to Desdemona. You see, Desdemona is uncommonly cautious, and with this virus still around in the city, she won't venture out without a face mask. Now, Othello, in the early stages of their romance, had given her an unusual example. It was white with a pattern of strawberries. It amused them both that a thing of such prosaic necessity could be so delicately embroidered. And Desdemona treasured this thing of little consequence because it was Othello's very first gift. Knowing all this, I kept my eyes out for this face mask whenever I was in their quarters. Eventually, I spotted it, hanging out to dry in the laundry, and being left alone for a moment, I hastily unpegged it and made off with it. My intention is to hide it in Cassius' quarters. Hide it well enough that Cassius himself would not readily come upon it, but not so well that it couldn't be found in a very thorough search. Well, I've planted my evidence, but even without it, my revenge is already half complete. Othello hasn't slept a wink since I reluctantly voiced my suspicions. He was in a right old state, wishing he'd never suspected her at all. Better, he thought, to be happy in his ignorance. All his triumphs and glories, his rank and accolades, all were as nothing in the light of this jealousy. Of course, he cursed me, though he still thought me honourable. He tasked me to prove my suspicions beyond all doubt, otherwise, if unfounded, I'd be to blame for his wretched state of mind. I said I wish I'd never revealed my thoughts in the first place, but reminded him that he'd dragged them out of me, and now I was so deeply involved that I felt I had to mention two matters which had transpired only the night before. I told Othello how, after an evening of revelry, I'd crashed down in Cassius' quarters. I was woken in the night by him thrashing around and talking in his sleep. Much of it was quite unintelligible, but I did manage to catch a few distinct words, such as, "Sweet Desdemona, let's be careful and hide our passion." Not that that proved anything, of course, I hasten to add. It could just be some unrequited fantasy which had informed his dreams last night. But there was one other strange thing. In the morning, when I was gathering my belongings to leave, one discarded sock had rolled under his bed, and when I went to retrieve it, I found a face mask down there. It was white, embroidered with a pattern of strawberries. Now, I couldn't be sure, but did not Desdemona own such a face mask? Or was my memory deceiving me? Well, a dark cloud passed over Othello's brow at that moment. "Yes," he said, "it was my very first present to her. A handmade thing from the craft market in town. There could be very few like it, maybe none. This was proof indeed." I advised him not to jump to conclusions. It may be similar, but not the very same mask. Perhaps different in some important detail. I said I'm sure that would be the case. But to satisfy his concerns, I suggested a thorough search of Cassius' quarters. Perhaps on the pretext of looking for drugs. Oh, well, we had a search of the whole barracks last year for very much the same reason. Now he really was in a bad way. Something about, "Arise, black vengeance from the depths of hell," and how his love had in an instant been transformed into hate. What? I said it was all circumstantial. That I'm sure that there would be some innocent explanation for the face mask and the dream and the constant entreaties on Cassius' behalf and his hasty departure from their quarters, if indeed that was Cassius. He wasn't persuaded. I offered to ask Cassius directly about Desdemona, in confidence, but using my phone to secretly record our conversation. Needless to say, Othello agreed to this plan. I mean, he was very grateful to me for my loyalty and resourcefulness. Now, Cassius had a dalliance with a local girl, Bianca. She's a striking young woman, desired by many of the squaddies, but she only has eyes for Cassius. In truth, she cares about him more than he cares about her. So, I inquired about their relations before secretly setting my phone to record. Cassius spoke freely about how she doted upon him, poor thing, but he has no thoughts of marrying her, though she thinks that he will, but not because of any promise he's made to her, but she flatters herself. He said it was all too much for him. He mentioned how she follows him everywhere he goes and hangs about his neck and cries on his shoulder. Of course, he uttered her name, Bianca, and some other incompatible details, but I edited them out of the recording that I played to Othello. He was right. I am indeed resourceful. And determined. Now, after hearing all of this, Othello thinks Cassius is speaking of Desdemona. Well, that's what I told him. And then, to make matters worse, just after I played the recording, Othello received news of the search. The strawberry face mask had been found in Cassius' quarters. Wow, what a surprise. Othello didn't hang around. He went off in a blind rage to confront Desdemona. To be honest, feared for her life. That was more than I expected. Far more. By all accounts, Othello stormed in, and there was much shouting came from their quarters. Voices were raised, both Othello's and Desdemona's, although her shouts were suddenly stifled. There followed an ominous silence, and then, at length, a single gunshot. It seems that Othello had struck Desdemona so hard she'd expired on the spot, and then he took his own life using his own service revolver. So, is revenge sweet? Well, it's not sour. For when a man becomes your enemy, all thoughts of empathy and compassion dissolve, taking with them all notions of pity and fellow feeling. One moment, you'll go to great lengths to help a friend or even a stranger out of the goodness of your heart. The next moment, if, for whatever reason, he deserves your enmity, you'll happily see all manner of disaster befall him. Even be instrumental yourself in his downfall. So it was with Othello. So, yes, this revenge is indeed